Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kate Reed. I'm the MLA for Great Slave and the Deputy Chair of the Standing Committee on Government Operations. This morning, committee will be receiving a briefing on the North Slave Power Grid Modernization. As a reminder, this meeting is being live streamed on the Assembly's social media channels. Please wait to be recognized and for your mic to be turned on. It's turned on by our staff before speaking, and please direct all comments and questions through the chair. I will now ask members to introduce themselves, starting with folks in the room.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Denny Rogers. I'm the MLA for Inuvik-Boot Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. And going to members online, starting with our chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Julian Morse, MLA for Frame Lake, and very disappointed I couldn't be there this morning, but glad I was at least able to call in.
Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Robert Hawkins, MLA for Yellowknife Center. I'm happy to zoom into the meeting and participate as well as so many of our millions of subscribers. We're looking forward to this. Thank you so much.
Mr. Hawkins, Mr. Jericon.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Richard Jericon, MLA for Trinity Ability. Dialed in from Hay River, going to forward resolution today for graduation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jericon, and I believe we have one more member online.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Kieran Testart, member for Range Lake here in Yellowknife.
Thank you, members. The committee is joined this morning by Minister Carolyn Wozniak, Minister responsible for the NTPC, Judy Goucher, Chair of the NTPC Board of Directors, Corey Strang, NTPC CEO, and Belinda Whitford, NTPC COO. Minister, I'll turn this over to you to provide your opening remarks before we hear from your other staff to go through your presentation. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for dispensing with the introductions. I will go straight into my opening remarks, and then we do have a brief presentation to share with you this morning. We are here to discuss plans to modernize the North Slave power grid that serves Det'anchogh, Yellowknife, Det'anchogh, and Delo. Other Canadian jurisdictions, as you may know, have large generation sites connected by multiple transmission lines that provide the reliability that Southern Canadians have come to experience and expect. The Northwest Territories is different. The Northwest Territories electrical system is segmented into isolated community grids and two separate hydrogrids. These two grids are not connected, meaning that the two systems cannot back each other up if there is a generation or transmission issue, or in the case of the low water on the snare system, which occurs naturally roughly every 10 years. Customer expectations have changed over the years, making it a challenge to meet expectations that rely on a system that was designed and that has not changed much in nearly 50 years. Having non-connected grids between Snare and Tahltan has proven to be both an operationally and financially difficult and a structural challenge for the Northwest Territories' future. The Northwest Territories cannot progress if the electrical infrastructure is not improved. The GNWT issued policy directions to the Public Utilities Board to review how electricity systems currently work and how they can be improved into the future. Public engagement has already started with discussions at the Northwest Territories Association of Community meetings back in February of 2026, and Northwest Territories Power Corporation has been conducting community visits around the Beaufort Delta. It's a good start. I certainly would encourage all communities to work closely with the utility providers to schedule planned discussions around this topic so that they can be used to help develop long-term energy plans. With that, I will now turn over to Ms. Goucher to say a few opening words before our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Madam Chair and Committee, for having us here today. As Minister Wozniak pointed out in her opening statement, the NWT electrical grids have been the same for the last 50 years, with hydro generation connected to customers by a single transmission line with dedicated diesel backup in the event there is a hydro or transmission disruption. Over the years, advancements have been completed with hydro plant refurbishments, plant automation, grid monitoring, and protection settings, but the overall design has been the same. With projected sales growth from the Department of National Defence, it is an opportune time to modernize the current grid and ready the North for the future. For committee's awareness, this meeting is slightly ahead of schedule as the Board of Directors have not reviewed the modernization options yet, However, we are scheduled to review and provide feedback to management at our meeting in June. We thank you for your time, and I will now turn things over to Corey Strang, CEO, who will walk through the presentation with committee.
Thank you so much. Mr. Strang, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you for committee for having us today. For the agenda today, Belinda Whitford, Chief Operating Officer, will go over the system background, describe outages, and why the SNARE system has a higher frequency of outages than other jurisdictions that are connected to the continental power grid. Belinda will review the current state of infrastructure and what is being done to reduce outages with the current system design. Then I will go over the plan to modernize the grid and provide a timeline for the application that is required to the NWT Public Utilities Board. With that, I'll turn things over to Belinda.
Thank you. Please go right ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so this picture, I guess I'll say, is an outline of the North Slave grid. It is a complex distribution of assets and connections, and I'll try and walk us through that. So we'll start at the top. The top is our SNARE hydro system, and there are 6 units there. Together, those units have an operating capacity of 28 megawatts, and I'll say that is continuous operating capacity. So there are points in time when we could run some of those units a little bit more, a little bit harder to get through some high hydro points, but overall 28 megawatts. These units they were installed from 1948 to 1993, so a wide range of operating dates. The Falls and the Forks unit number 1 have had overhauls in the last 10 years, but the remaining units have not. They are scheduled to have overhauls somewhere in the next 5 to 15 years, depending on their condition. Going a little further down, there's 2 more blue dots there. That represents the Bluefish hydro system, and that provides another 6 megawatts to our hydro generation supply. So that brings us to a total of 34 megawatts of hydro that is possible on the North Slave hydro grid. Bluefish unit number 1 was commissioned in the 1940s. However, it did have an overhaul in 2014, and the second unit was added in 1995. If NTPC loses its largest generation source, the SNARE hydro facility, then we go to diesel generation. And you'll see at the bottom there, that represents our Jackfish generating plant, which has 12 units of various sizes. Commissioning dates range from the 1970s to a 4 megawatt unit that was just recently commissioned in 2025. There are also 2.6 megawatts of generation available in Det'anchogh to support those customers. Along with the generation units, we have transmission lines that connect SNARE to Yellowknife and also SNARE to Det'anchogh, and we have a transmission line from Bluefish to Yellowknife as well. The transmission lines are run the same kind of ages as the hydro generation. So from the 1960s to the early 2000s, we had those units installed. And then connecting all of the transmission lines and the hydro and the diesel generation together, we have something called substations. And so this is where all of this power meets together and then gets distributed to customers. And you know, down at Jackfish, there is a big tangle of wires and transformers and towers. That's a substation. So substations in this North Slave system also run the same ages that we have our transmission and SNARE, so 1960s to early 2000s. To add more complexity to this system, NTPC is not the only part of the power supply in the North Slave grid. We also connect to Det'anchogh Power as part of our, they are distributors to Yellowknife Delo on the North Slave system. So that adds more complexity to the system. So keeping power generating and lights on takes coordination of all these pieces along with auxiliary systems such as fuel, maintenance, and the people. So how have we been doing in terms of keeping the lights on in the North Slave grid? There's a graph here, and on the far right-hand side is the results for 25-26 compared to the past 4 years. And this graph is showing SAFE. And what SAFE is it's a utility standard, and it stands for System Average Interruption Frequency Index. So how many times have customers experienced outages in the past 12 months? And it's not only the number of times, but it's also weighted by the number of customers impacted. So if an outage only impacts 10 customers, it has a lower impact on the SAFE score than if an outage is system-wide. So, as the minister said, as well as our chair, given the distance between communities NTPC serves, weather variations in our climate, and this isolated system, it is expected that our SAFE would be higher than other utilities in southern Canada. As you can see with the bar on the far right-hand side, for 25-26, we have had significantly more outages than, say, in the past 2 years and more in the last 4 years. So we are, if 25-26 has felt like we've had more outages than normal, that is true, we have. Very few of our communities are connected by an electricity grid, and even though the North Slave is a grid, it is reliant on, only the system itself can provide power. We can't connect to other companies for additional generation or support on that. So that does increase the number of outages that we might have. So there are 3 types of outages. We have planned outages, which I should say not all outages are bad. Some of them are good and planned. So we do create planned outages to do required maintenance on our systems. So we did have some in 21-22 and 22-23, none in the last 3 years. The rest of them have been controllable outages and non-controllable outages. So controllable outages are outages that the utility has some influence over. So equipment failures, human error, those are controllable type of outages. Non-controllable type of outages are ones that we can influence, but we don't have control over and we can't manage directly. So things like weather, animal contacts, and also any outages that are started or initiated by our distributor on the North Slave grid would also be considered non-controllable from an NTPC perspective. So in 25-26, 45% of our outages are controllable, have been controllable caused, and then 55% of those are non-controllable. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. So this graph here breaks down the causes behind the outages in 25-26. So the 2 pieces of the pie at the top represent controllable outages. So we'll start with the orange piece of pie. Those are equipment failure type outages, and they represent 35% of our SAFE rating. So almost half of these outages relate to an issue we were having at our Snare Falls Hydro unit, and it's called a blade positioning issue. And I think we did post a few public notices about this issue, as it created a number of outages, not only this year, but also last year as well. So we have been working with the manufacturer of the unit to isolate the cause and create a solution. We did come up with a solution that was installed, new blades were installed, or controlling mechanism for the blade was installed in August of 2025. We did have 2 additional outages after that. We did some adjustments to the equipment in December, and since then, that has ceased to have a major impact on equipment-related outages. The light blue wedge at the very top relates to what we call intermittent outages, and that's 12% of our outages for 25-26. And so these are outages where we haven't been able to identify what the root cause for these outages are. They are generally fairly quick in nature, and we haven't been able to track those down. Given the complexity of this Snare system, with upgrades at the hydro plants, additional diesel units being added, modifications to substations, and the various ages of equipment, over time, there are imbalances in the protection settings that can lead to outages, and we think that some of these outages are related to that. And I will discuss more on the next slide how we are looking to address some of those outages. The next 3 wedges on the pie relate to what we call those non-controllable outages. So the dark blue wedge at the bottom, 18% of our outages were initiated by the distribution system, by Det'anchogh Power. The top 2 green pieces, the dark green is wildlife or vegetation contacts, created outages, and that was 15% of those outages. And then 20% of our outages were related to weather. So things like windstorms and lightning were responsible for 20% of the outages last year. So how is NTPC tackling these outages and making the North Slave system more reliable in the shorter and the longer term? I'll start with the shorter ones at the top and then longer lasting plans and initiatives as we go down to the bottom. So with distribution-related outages, NTPC has been working with Det'anchogh Power to improve communications, not only between our two utilities, but also in communications with our customers. We've restarted our quarterly operational meetings. We've participated in 2 emergency response exercises together this year, and we are working together on the PUB-driven integrated power systems planning process. NTPC has commissioned a North Slave protection study. This study will review the system as a whole, including snare, bluefish, the transmission lines, jackfish, and Det'anchogh Power distribution system. It is expected that there will be a number of recommendations for adjustments to the protection settings coming out of this study. And those adjustments will be NTPC's, and they may also include adjustments to Det'anchogh's distribution system. The recommendations from this report are expected to reduce the number of outages as well as the number of customers impacted when an outage does occur. NTPC has increased the vegetation management in high-risk areas on the snare system for the next 3 years. This work started in 25-26 with clearing vegetation for the right-of-way between Snare Rapids and Snare Forks, both plants at the Snare hydro site. In conjunction with vegetation management, NTPC is also installing bird deterrent systems at the Jackfish substation. Some of this work started in 25-26, and more will be done this year. In addition to addressing the known issues with the Snare Falls blade positions, NTPC has also put a refocus on asset management in 25-26 to highlight assets critical to reliability and confirm maintenance practices and replacement options. This work will show up in our 20-year capital plan, which will better reflect required replacement cycles for critical assets. Finally, the Snare Grid Modernization is a project which will build on these shorter-term improvements to reliability, along with addressing longer-term resiliency, load increases, and the work being done with communities on integrated power system planning. I will now turn things over to Corey to discuss the modernization plans.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Mr. Strang.
Thank you, Belinda. Defining the problem statement is key when we are reviewing and examining various solutions. The announcement from the Department of National Defence identifying Yellowknife as a northern operational hub creates the opportunity to modernize the grid for the expected sales growth. The problem we're trying to solve is addressing future low water events that occur naturally on the Snare system approximately every 10 years, improving reliability while preparing for load growth. To solve this problem, we need to consider various inputs, such as the updated Snare resiliency study, the protection study Belinda discussed earlier, a hydropower assessment study that was completed by the GNWT, and a jackfish backup study. These studies will be used along with long-term sales forecast scenarios to determine the best possible solution. The recommended solution also needs to consider the updated GNWT Energy and Climate Change Strategy, the 2025 GNWT Electricity Policy Directions to the NWT Public Utilities Board, and the Tolston Expansion Project. Each scenario will be measured against 7 criteria. The scenarios include both technical solutions, such as increased generation sources, and non-technical solutions, such as a customer-funded low water savings account. It is highly unlikely that only one solution, such as increased water storage, will solve the problem, and more than likely several solutions will need to be combined into one scenario to address these issues. The scenarios will be examined and prioritized based on customer rate impact, impact to the environment and greenhouse gas emissions, how quickly the scenario can be completed and adopted, the impact on reliability to reduce the frequency and duration of outages, how well the scenario mitigates future low water events, what are the funding options to reduce the rate impact to customers, stakeholder engagement and assessment, and how effectively the risks can be managed. When we are examining the future infrastructure requirement, we need to complete load forecast scenarios. We are examining 4 growth scenarios that will assist in determining the recommended modernization plan. The NWT Public Utility Board was directed by the GNWT to establish electrical vehicle charging rates, as the GNWT anticipates the adoption of electric vehicles will ultimately represent an important revenue stream for utilities. The GNWT also has an interest in utilities using current hydropower surpluses to increase sales and utility revenue. The GNWT anticipates an overall increase in electrification in response to local and national climate policy. Utilities should follow a plan with timelines to identify the available hydroelectric surpluses and how those surpluses can be fully utilized. This work is part of the Integrated Power System Plan that started with discussions at the NWT Association of Communities General Meeting in February 2026. All of these long-term plans need to be incorporated into the Snare Grid Modernization Plan. A multiple forecast model is preferred and referenced by the Public Utility Board in a March 2018-2026 letter to the utilities and stakeholders. The PUB stated due to the uncertainty regarding the scale and timing of future load growth from the Department of National Defense, mineral development, and other emerging economic activities, it is important that the long-term planning models incorporate a flexible scenario-based planning approach that evaluates multiple potential future pathways. The table presented has the annual sales changes over a 20-year period through 4 different scenarios. The sales forecast does not include growth from potential mines such as Gold Terra or Lift, or from new rate class or customers such as data centers or data mining. These customers will be modeled on a case-by-case basis. The low growth scenario looks at only community load growth from the current sources, and we are forecasting a 5% sales growth over the next 20 years in the sales system. This is low, as we know right now. We're experiencing this higher right now based on certain load growth that we're seeing in the city of Yellowknife and in Det'anchogh. The net zero growth scenario includes a low growth scenario but adds increased electrification sales from vehicles and heating. This scenario is aspirational, using data provided by the Snare Resiliency Study that uses a high adoption of electrification sources. This scenario has an 84% increase in sales volume over the next 20 years. The Department of National Defense growth model requires an additional 10 megawatts of generation to meet direct Department of National Defense sales growth and an additional 3 megawatts from indirect city growth by 2030. The desire is for green energy by 2035, and this can be a modular solution with thermal generation at the start, which could be transferred to hydro generation. This scenario has a 51% increase in sales growth. The final growth model is the maximum that combines the net zero growth model and the Department of National Defense model with a 135% sales increase. Each scenario considers the impact of the low water that occurs naturally on the system every 10 years. There are multiple options to modernize the grid, which includes both technical and non-technical solutions. A technical option, such as a new liquid natural gas power plant, may have a different size power plant and timelines from one scenario to the next. For example, if the Nolly Power Project is selected to meet expected Department of National Defense load growth before the hydro plant transmission line can be constructed, a modular liquid natural gas plant might be required. The final recommendation will more than likely include elements that are common to other options, so all scenarios need to be compared using the 7 deliverables we reviewed earlier. Management will be presenting the options to the Board of Directors in June 2026 for an initial review and assessment. Once feedback from the Board is received, management will provide a recommendation to the Board in September of 2026. After this, we'll refine the cost estimates and continue stakeholder engagement through the Integrated Power System planning process. During this time, we'll also advance discussions with the Department of National Defense and the federal government on possible third-party funding options and engage Indigenous governments on independent power producer models. Once that is completed, an application will be submitted to the NWT Public Utilities Board, and the Public Utility Board will establish a public review process. And I want to thank committee. That's all of the items that we have in our presentation, and we're more than happy to any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. 2 more members have joined us during your presentation. Welcome to the member for Yellowknife North and the member for Montfouille. I will turn to committee for questions. Well, I have questions if no one else does. Mr. Rogers, please. Sure.
Thank you for the presentation. Certainly appreciate that. Obviously, we get it. We know our infrastructure is old. We know there's a bunch of work that needs to be done on that. Right now, obviously, all the excitement and all the talk out there is on what's happening with D&D, with this infrastructure funding that we see coming through, with both D&D and the other side, the Mackenzie Valley Highway as well. And it certainly seems that the government of Canada are pushing fairly quickly on this and want to see this done, and they've made a commitment like we've never seen before. So, can you speak a little to maybe where you are in your? And I know you've mentioned in your presentations about conversations you're having with D&D. There's potential third-party funding there. Can you kind of speak to maybe a vision or a wish list of what you'd like to see with that funding coming through, and then maybe any conversations you've had to date kind of initially with what you can see maybe this could be, how we could leverage obviously this funding coming through, given that they need significant amount of power produced. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. The minister has nodded at you, Mr. Strang.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the question. Before I answer that, I also want to acknowledge that we're also looking at a modernization plan for the community of Inuvik as well. We're looking at it this year because we're seeing much the same thing with the Department of National Defense Investment. Different things you're trying to solve on that community because it's different items, not being a hydro community, but we're looking at plans to modernize the infrastructure we have there already with our battery energy storage system, along with a microgrid controller and a significant amount of renewable investment that's there, and trying to make sure everything works and it's safe and secure. So we're doing the similar outcome for Inuvik as we are with Scenario. I just wanted to mention that for you as well. The conversations with the Department of National Defense really started in October and November of 2025. Early conversations about what their plans are and their forward operating bases, if I can use that term, in Inuvik and Yellowknife. We continue those discussions now. Obviously, for any investment that you have, we are a cost recovery business, so any investment that we need to make needs to be recovered from either current customers, or if the load growth is required from the Department of National Defense, that's the conversations we're having with them on the potential funding applications that they may be able to provide for those increases. So it's still really early goings. Nothing's been signed. We continue with those conversations. We have working groups and committees that report to me as CEO on these particular items, and that's the importance of these 2 particular projects. It's right. The board of directors gave me my marching orders here in March, and one of those 2 items are my objectives for this year, which includes funding for whatever solution we need to come up with on those items. I don't know if I answered your question, but early goings on those conversations, they continue. We consult obviously with the government of Northwest Territories, or here in Yellowknife, it's the city of Yellowknife, or in Inuvik, it's the town of Inuvik and the Indigenous governments. All of these conversations are happening at the moment, and we're really marching hard towards those items to really come up with a solution. What everybody needs as their item, trying to solve that. Obviously, federal funding would help everybody up here in the Northwest Territories. I've said that a lot, so that conversation is being had a lot. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Strang. Mr. Rogers, do you have a follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, thank you for that. And I mean, again, it's just to reassure everyone that we are engaged not only on the construction side and the other things that come with this funding, but also on this very important topic as well. I mean, obviously, and listen, I want to thank Mr. Strang. I know when he does travel to the Beaufort Delta, he does give the leadership time to sit and have a conversation with them up there, and we've had several conversations around the Inuvik and what's happening there, and I wasn't, given that wasn't part of this presentation, but I will ask one question on Inuvik since he did bring it up. What, if any, has talks been progressing on? Again, we know that the New Valley Regional Corporation are close. I think they're Q1 in 27. They're going to have their small LNG plant online, or CNG plant. Has there been any further conversations on that around the potential of using that energy and potentially building a transmission line either into the community and maybe or the FOL site as well? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Strang.
Thank you. Again, I don't want to, again, that's part of our objectives this year to come to the solution. That is a great opportunity for that area and that region. The M18 well is, I'll use the term relatively close to Det'anchogh and Inuvik, and there's multiple options. It could be a transmission line. It could be a pipeline. So those are the items that we're looking at for the items that Department of National Defense is telling us that they need for their load growth at the airport is very significant for the community load as it currently stands in Inuvik. 3 times as much as the current load is. That is significant. So we're having those conversations. We're having those conversations with the Gwich'in Tribal Council and NETAT Gwich'in as well about what we can do, and also with the town of Inuvik and how we can combine everything, and this great opportunity to use that in a regional center that is sustainable. So then you're not trucking, as we currently do, liquid natural gas up the entire Dempster, which we currently do now, because we have 3 storage tanks there for natural gas. Part of that modernization plan, since you mentioned it, MLA Rogers, I'm going to jump on my bandwagon. I appreciate that. We are looking to modernize our systems and all the opportunities that we have for Inuvik by having the battery energy storage system being a grid-forming battery. Right now, the battery that's there works in conjunction with the wind turbine as one. You need to have a diesel or gas engine running to form the grid. What we're going to do, we're looking to change the parameters around that in a bigger battery such that if you do lose your diesel engine, that battery can form the grid. That is one of the solutions as well for Yellowknife that we're looking at. So we want to modernize that, and a battery energy storage system, one of the benefits of it as well is if you want to be in solar and you want to be in an independent power producer space, in the summertime when there's lots of electricity, you need some place for that to go. Without storage, you cannot enable more solar generation, even if someone wants to invest in that space. So if this is utility-owned, grid control, everything's safe and secure, because Belinda's going to get the phone call immediately, and then she's texting me if we have an issue. For sustainability, that's the thing that is key for utilities. Our friends over in the Yukon, they are dealing with some of this stuff, and now they're backing off on some of their policies. We don't want to end up in that particular space. Utilities across North America, we're very connected with them, so this is a very good space that we're in. So it's very excited about what's occurring as well in your community as well, and trying to modernize that and take advantage of some of these opportunities that we have. Sorry, I apologize, I took that and I jumped right on it. I appreciate the opportunity there as well, though.
Thank you, Mr. Strang. I'm sure Mr. Rogers appreciates that you went on about the Beaufort Delta in the North Slave briefing. Next on my list is Mr. Hawkins. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, unless I missed it, I didn't see any costing or sort of breaking of timelines. In other words, the expectations of, we need X dollars and we need it probably in this type of window. If you did, could you re-highlight it? Because I think it's important to talk about the burden that this will be creating, in the sense that I appreciate the growth. Because then one concern that I'll always keep arising is, will the reinvestment hit the bottom line of the ratepayer, or will the modernization effectively help support the cost stabilization? So your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Yeah, I noticed also on one of your options of grid modernization was a customer-funded savings account. So to you, Mr. Strang.
Thank you, and I appreciate the question. And no to Emily Hawkins, you did not miss anything. It was not presented to committee because I need to present it to my board chair first and the board first. And once we get their feedback, which we're going to get their feedback next month in June, then our plan is to hopefully get the board with all the options that you've considered. What is the rate impact? How are you going to fund this? What's it for reliability? What's it going to do on climate change? All those 7 aspects of every scenario we're looking at will address that. Even if it's a independent power producer, such as with the Det'anchogh government, looking at the opportunities that's in that space for power development, it might not be the utility that needs to spend the money, but we have estimates working with the Det'anchogh government on what it would be for their power project and how that could feed into the system. So no, we specifically did not have anything here present to committee, just because we wanted to follow the proper chain, which is going to our board first, and also in conversations with the Public Utility Board, who has ultimate authority into reviewing these systems as well. Stakeholder engagement, I love being here in front of the committee today. I really appreciated it. When I received the invite, I was excited for it, because this is stakeholder engagement. You need to have these conversations and acknowledging that, yeah, we did not do well in our reliability this last year. Our staff has done a tremendous job of all the work that they've done, but it is frustrating, it is tiresome, it is challenging. Hear it all the time, so we want to improve. We need to improve. With respect to the item about what I called a savings account, that was a direction as part of some of the directions from the government to the Public Utility Board is to, we know that we have this low water event on the SNARE system every 10 years. We had it in 2014-16. We had it again in 2022 to 24. It occurs naturally. It's occurred naturally since 1970. So one of the options that was directed to the Public Utility Board was to look at a customer-funded approach such that it's not a big hit next time. One of the items that I was very clear when I was asking my staff to look at solutions from this, I didn't want my opinion to influence their item. I was very clear on that. I was very clear. I did not want any project selection bias. I did not want to look at anything. I wanted to look at other non-technical solutions, such as demand-side management, such as time-of-use rates, all those items. I will say, though, I'm not a fan of that. I believe there's probably better solutions that we can have than having customers put money away for a non-rainy day, pardon the pun. But that is something that we're looking at as a direction from the government to look at the Public Utility Board. So we'd look with the Public Utility Board on that. They would challenge us in some of our examples that we have a recommendation as well. And that's part of the process that we come up trying to find the best solution, long-term sustainable solution for customers, not only from a rate and cost perspective, but also sustainability and reliability as we try to balance those three items when we provide electricity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Strang. Mr. Hawkins, a follow-up?
Thank you. Just ever so briefly, appreciate that. Maybe if you could capture a little bit of the intended start date. That was part of the first element of the question. The other aspect is just in brief, knowing that this is going to be probably a very expensive undertaking, what type of models of funding is the corporation presenting to the board and potentially to the government? I know you're not going to talk about the heavy details because you just said it hasn't formally been presented, but are there options such as, for example, going to the public and saying, could we invest in this? This is a great opportunity to invest. The Legislative Assembly was built under these types of debentures and opportunities. And if we know that citizens could be investing in their own birthright projects, that could be good. And maybe lastly, Madam Chair, just as a reminder, I know this is a lot all at once, is that we tend to build infrastructure, in my view, and in certainly my experiences on yesterday's problems, hoping today it'll solve ourselves. But by the time we implement it, it's so out of date in the sense of to meet the capacity needs. So in other words, is this capacity really forward-looking? So in essence, potential starts, funding options, and is it forward-looking, dealing with some of the challenges before us? Because it'd be great to do it, but then find out the moment you turn it on, it's already out of date. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Mr. Strang.
Thank you. Appreciate the question. As for potential start date, it's already started. What I mean by that is our board has approved funding for this fiscal year to examine some of these options. For that's this fiscal year. The challenge that we have with any capital project, which a lot of people in this room know, is we want to make sure that we have good estimates on those projects. So the plan that we want to have is internal. When I use the word internally, that's with management and the board of directors. That'll be this fiscal year. Coming up with that plan, more of the refinement. Here's the estimates, here's the cost, here's the potential funding solutions, either from Department of National Defense, federal government, or other funding streams that we have. This also will allow conversations that we're having in the North Slave with the Det'anchogh government on the potential water generation hydro that they have on their lands and how they could be an independent power producer, and they would have the power production and just spill into the grid and get paid for it, much like they started in the early 90s with SNARE Cascades Hydro Plant, which was the first Indigenous-owned hydro plant in Canada. I don't think that's spoken about as much as it should be. So it has started. What we're doing now internally is we will be working with our board of directors, coming up with a more solid plan. There is budget available this year to refine those cost estimates and plan. So that's the start date, and then we'll go to the Public Utility Board with the plan itself and work with them in conjunction with the power system plan, which is also going on as well, which again is direction from the government to the Public Utility Board on all sorts of items such as how to solve low water, how does integrated power system planning work, how does net metering work, how much money do you, if you're a net metering customer, how much money should you get? Those are all items as well. The Public Utility Board will have items in July. Again, I can't speak for the Public Utility Board, but we are heavily involved as a utility. Same with NACA Utilities as well is heavily involved in that. Trying to think of the third question. Right, the forward-looking question, that's one I do appreciate, and I did reference a letter that the Public Utility Board sent the utilities in March, where they wanted to look at not as one solution. So you don't want to get to a space where you recommend a $500 million investment for a sales forecast that may not come to fruition. So that's why they've already had that direction, which we are using in our model. That's why we're looking at 4 sales models from a low base scenario, i.e. normal growth that we're seeing in the city of Yellowknife now, versus something exponential with high penetration of electrification, high adoption, Department of National Defense, and that's at 184% increase. Do I think that's realistic? That's the modeling that we have to do. So that's the range. When you're making these long-term investments decisions, you need to consider that, because you don't want to get into the space where you're having stranded investments at the end of, say, 20 years because what your reality or forecast didn't come through. So all of that items that will be reviewed by the Public Utility Board in an open, transparent space whenever the plan comes. When we have, internally, we have a plan in place, then we'll work with the Public Utility Board to start the consultation process on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strang. Next on my list is MLA Jericon.
Good morning to everybody. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank the minister and the minister's staff for coming in to do this presentation. We've been following this presentation for some time now, but I guess for me is I'm a little concerned now, given that we're in a situation with world prices of oil going up and the unstable market we're in now. And I know that this project is still yet in process and still has to go through the regulatory process as well. But in the presentation, it talks about power lines going into the larger communities and tie in some communities, but most communities are going to feel the impact this year with the high cost of oil and the small communities where fuel is brought in by the winter road and also barged in. So they're the ones that are going to feel the impact of the high cost, because the fuel prices is fixed and the communities are going to be stuck paying that high cost. But anyway, I guess my question is that as we move forward on this project, if and when the communities, like smaller communities, get tied in, when in your plan are we looking at trying to do that? Are we looking down maybe 5-10 years down the road? Because we still got to go through a few more hurdles here before it goes through the approval process. So anyway, that'd be my question, if you can help me answer that. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Jericon. Mr. Strang.
I couldn't really hear
Was it?
what the question was at the end.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Was it just about what are we, I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the question. Was it about the higher fuel prices and what we're doing immediately with that aspect?
I heard that part as well. I didn't.
Mr. Jericon, could you perhaps clarify your question? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. No, as part of your business plan on this project, it mainly addresses the power in the communities, in the larger communities, but in smaller communities that down the road that are impacted because of the high fuel cost of oil and such. In your business plan, do you have a plan to tie in those communities to help reduce the power costs eventually as the fuel prices go up? So that'd be my question. Is basically, when in your plan are you guys going to look at this issue? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jericon. I'll turn it back to Mr. Strang.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the clarification. Some of our smaller isolated communities which you're not close to an existing hydro location. Most of the communities in Northwest Territories, about 70% of the communities are around Great Slave Lake. And those are the ones that we're looking at, how close can we tie those into hydro? So that would be the communities of Watee, Fort Providence, those communities there are very, very close to those side. When we look at some of our other communities, which are diesel-based communities, more than likely, it's going to be very challenging to remove 100% off diesel generation. There are ways. The government does have the net zero by 2050, and we are part of that. And what you can do for those communities is exactly what we're doing with Inuvik, with the high penetration renewables, intermittent renewables, either wind or solar, but it needs some place to go. So that's where if you can introduce your batteries, and you can introduce some way to control either grid controllers, that's where you can have that less reliant on your diesel and that price fluctuations. Again, not even the price of fuel, which we're seeing right now, and everyone's seeing that, but it's also availability. We experience that, even transportation of diesel fuel if you have the Mackenzie River that you can't use, which has been used for 600 years. These are the challenges that we're facing, is how do we design a system so we don't have as much reliant on diesel generation, which you have to truck in. M18 is a good example how you could de-risk it, because if that was there, that's more sustainable because it's a regional-based model. That's the opportunity that you have with something right in that area. But if you can reduce the amount that you need to truck in all the time, then that helps you. And you can do that with high penetration intermittent renewables, but it needs some place to go. And that's the battery energy storage technology that'll help you with that. Appreciate the question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strang. Mr. Jericon, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the response. I would have further questions for a session for the minister to see how we're going to assist small communities with the current rising fuel costs. I'll say that my question for then. If you don't mind, maybe without getting into the confidential details of the negotiations on the legacy issues, are you able to maybe update the committee and where things are at on this issue? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jericon. I will turn that over to the minister, please.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Emily Jericon. So legacy discussions are underway now for the Taulton Hydro facilities or the expansion. So just to put a bit of context on that, we're not, obviously don't have all the materials or presentation here before us, but I've certainly made clear, as have the Indigenous governments who are members of this steering committee, made clear that the expansion project is dependent upon resolution ultimately of the legacy issues that arose from the original flooding that took place when the first Taulton Dam was built. So we've now met with the federal minister, and all of our officials continue to follow up with our regional director from CERNAC. And I think there's actually been the impression, the last briefing I had with our officials was that there's been some progress, that there are some ideas being put forward. But each individual Indigenous government has their own viewpoint as to what an appropriate resolution might be, as well as the appropriate path. So some take the path of doing a specific claim, some may want to negotiate directly in a different way, and that is something that we want to ensure that each Indigenous government has that opportunity to make those choices appropriate to themselves. So again, as I can say, the last impression or the last briefing I had is that there's been some progress in terms of ideas coming back to us all now from CERNAC, which for a long time we were not necessarily getting at that level of engagement. That bottleneck seems to be solved. So add to it that we've been assured at the last steering committee amongst all the leadership, when we met with representatives from the Major Projects Office, they also assured us that they would have a role in making sure that the federal family is responsive and engaged. So they're taking that position. As I said, we've had some responses now from CERNAC. I don't have something specific to share, only because I want to make sure that, again, that it's the Indigenous governments themselves are each leading their own solution. But again, my overall response is that there's been more progress on this in the last couple of months than there had been for some time. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Next on my list, I have Emily Morse.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I wasn't sure how deep we were going to get into specifics today, so I think some of the questions I had, you probably don't have answers for, but maybe to get to a really high level, and this may be a question for both the minister and Mr. Strang. I'm just curious. I mean, I think it goes pretty much without saying, but I'll just note it as a precursor to my question that, the thing that matters most to the average customer, of course, is cost and reliability. That's what everybody's thinking about when they think about power. And I think most people aren't too concerned about how we get there. So knowing that cost of living is one of the key things that all of us as politicians hear about. I guess what I'm wondering is there planning and forecasting and collaboration happening between GNWT and the Power Corp on looking into what are the best case scenarios for ratepayers and how we can create those? So what I'm asking here is, are we looking at, forecasted costs for heating fuel, for example, and knowing that we need to stabilize our grid and increasing ratepayers would help us reduce costs. Is it advantageous to get everybody onto electric heat? If doing that would help people save costs on heating fuel, have we done cost analysis to see if that's even the case? Mr. Strang was talking earlier about one of the scenarios they're looking at is a possibility of increased electrification, so more people driving electric cars, more people switching over to electric heat. But I guess what I'm wondering is GNWT looking at how they can help to foster and create that scenario taking place? So, for example, in the past, we've subsidized people moving over to electric cars. I know that subsidy is gone now, but I'm wondering if we're doing that kind of planning and thinking and helping people see a vision towards where we're getting to. Because I know if we're going to be going out to ratepayers and asking them to invest or showing them that investment is going to be happening, are we building a vision that they can get behind where ultimately either their costs will be lower or at least kept without increasing at the levels that they've been increasing, which has been quite significant? I'm just curious how that is taking place. Are we thinking this through on that level, or are we more reacting to the scenarios that happen to us?
Thank you, Mr. Morse. I am waiting for bated breath for the updated energy and climate change strategy, so I'm also very interested in this question. As Mr. Morse spoke to wanting maybe a little bit of the answer from both of you, I'll start with the minister.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, happy to start, and then definitely we'll turn over to the Power Corporation's folks. But look, I want to pick up specifically on whether or not there is a vision here and whether or not we are simply responding to events as they unfold. So look, the reality is we have to continue to respond to the events as they unfold, because that is the role that government is expected to play, that as whatever crisis may befall us, that there is a response that comes available, and that we, as much as we can or when we can, are responsive to circumstances. So for example, on low water, and needing to move fuel and needing to institute some sorts of subsidy to mitigate the impacts of the costs of high diesel usage during the low fuel years. Which, again, is something that, based upon the Public Utilities Board's regulations, the entire territory will bear costs when there are such years. It's not just one user or one region. We all wind up bearing those costs as the Northwest Territories. But because of that, then yes, absolutely there has to be a vision. And as you just referenced, you've taken the wind out of the sails, which is just fine, that the updated climate change energy strategy is coming. It's coming to committee first and then out to the public, but there's been a lot of engagement on that in the last while to get to where it's at now. So draft is in hand and it's sort of coming to a committee near you is what I'll say. But we wanted, it is important because it does create, that document is a vision document. It is about how do we achieve net zero, which was already a commitment made previously in this government. And how do we achieve that in a context where we are struggling with all of the challenges of a grid that were laid out for you today? But that said, I do hope that folks are seeing that there is a sense of vision. There's net zero is a vision, that reliability is a vision, affordability is a vision. But it's a vision that has to come with some pretty clear and concrete, pathways forward. I will speak myself to some of what the GNWT has done. So first and foremost, just over a year ago now, we put forward the directions to the Public Utilities Board that I don't think perhaps get as much attention as they deserve, because they're significant and they were arguably something that was overdue, but that I think will lead us to a vision. So the first and foremost is the integrated power systems planning. let it be sort of sink in for a second that the territory does not have an integrated power systems plan. We don't. So we have isolated microgrids that are very challenged. We rely on diesel as our primary, and if not our backup, for absolutely this entire territory. And when you look at what's happening in the world geopolitically right now, that puts us at tremendous risk of cost and reliability. So having an integrated system plan that is aware of those challenges, is aware of the dates of some of the infrastructure that Belinda mentioned earlier, which if it doesn't give you pause to hear things like 1940 something, it, my view should. So yeah, having a systems plan in place that is for the whole of the territory, recognizing the challenges that we have is critical. That work is underway. The utilities are working together on it. They are working, it's under direction from the GNWT, and it's being led by the Public Utilities Board. So all of these pieces are coming together to deliver that. But then within that, community intermittent renewable generation caps. Long known that we can increase the ability of individual communities to do more intermittent renewable. But if they're going to do that, what kind of agreements or relationships do they need to have with the utility in terms of becoming independent power producers? That's also on the list, because again, don't have a policy for this. So, and I'm saying that in this hearing because I do think the public should be aware that we have recognized these challenges. We have recognized these as barriers to having a more integrated vision. We've put this to the Public Utilities Board, and they are actioning it, and they're actioning it in conjunction with the utilities. So, I happen to have always handy my list of these public utilities directions, updates to net metering, independent power producers, calculating compensation for renewable generation. These are significant things that impact our net zero obligations that we've already committed to, but also will factor into what our systems planning is going to look like. Electric vehicle charging, load growth, heating rates, how do we manage or plan for low water? Should there be a rider? Should we change the way we do that? Those are all things that are on that list of directions that were issued by the GNWD to the Public Utilities Board. So yeah, and all of that will factor then ultimately into the kind of vision that we want to get to. As a fundamental, we want to have a system that is, reliable, sustainable, and affordable. But those three things don't always complement one another. They are often in tension with one another, but the more that we can bring them into a place where they are more easily balanced, I think we'll be in a better position going forward. I will say the one last thing is you add to all of that, the world we find ourselves in Canada, where suddenly we have 2 massive D&D announcements and 3 massive projects, which we've all been asking, I shouldn't say all, but many people have been asking for 40 years. And suddenly all have been told, build them now and we'll get you there, which is a very different conversation to be had, including Tulsa Hydro, but including 2 corridors that are potentially going to bring the need for increased power capacity. So they're not in the numbers that were being put forward for what the anticipated load's going to be, because they're not knowns. They're probabilities, but they're not knowns. So all of that's coming together. I think people should be excited about the future of energy possibility in the north, because it could dramatically change the situation we are in today, which is disconnected and diesel reliant. And we're kind of on the cusp of having something, I think, a little more concrete and able to come out. I won't have all the funding planned out necessarily. But again, if I was to say that we're in a better place today in terms of understanding where some of that funding could be in the form of large commercial or industrial customers, D&D, for example, then I would say we're in a very different and better place than we were even 6 months ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Strang, do you have anything to add?
I'll keep it very short, Madam Chair. I thank you for that. I appreciate the question from the MLA, just looking at longer term visions, and it'll fold down on 2 items from government-led policy about net zero by 2050. Our chair, Judy Goucher, and our new chair, it's just relatively new. We're reviewing our strategic planning. We'll have a strategic planning session, but our 2 ultimate goals really are to reduce the electricity price gap between the rest of Canada and what we are, and we're about 3 times, and to reduce, to meet our climate change goals. So that's why we're also looking forward to the update from the 2030 energy strategy, which we were involved and we had input into that update as well. We work very closely with strategic infrastructure about long-term planning, looking at different items on whose responsibility for what. So I can assure you that we do have those long-term planning, and one of the things we want to provide our new board of directors is here's some options on here's status quo, and I've been in front of committee before talking about 2 or 3% inflation, sales are dropping. You're going to have 2 to 3% rate increases every year. That's reality. That's the status quo. But if you do this, if you do that, here's some outcomes. So that longer term vision is something we're going to be providing our board of directors on those options. And we're looking, our first time we want to present those options is in June of this year. So looking forward to the new direction from what Chair Goucher can do with the board and provide advice and guidance from management as we work towards working together as a whole and marching towards some of these good opportunities such as the Department of National Defense comes to us, as long with some other opportunities with bigger industrial such as mining and things of that nature. So that's kind of tying it into provide committee some assurance on how we work closely with the government of Northwest Territories. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strang. Mr. Morse, did you have a follow-up question?
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for those answers. In particular, Minister Wozniak. I appreciate how deep she tends to go with her answers. I guess what I'm asking, and I want to give a bit more context to why I'm asking what I'm asking, and that is just that I think that we, with GNWT releasing a 2050 carbon plan, we've just recently seen in Canada that, reducing carbon output for the sake of reducing carbon output is not something that taxpayers are particularly interested in and can die in an election cycle. And I think that it's just worth noting that it's not, I think, because necessarily people do or don't feel good about or feel strongly about whether or not they care about climate change. I think it's just that there's a lot of people in Canada and in the Northwest Territories who are in the unfortunate position of living paycheck to paycheck, and they simply can't afford to worry about those concerns because their number one concern is putting food on the table and bills. And so I just wanted to note that I think we've already seen a failure of that kind of policy when put forward as a good unto itself. That's something that I think a lot of people can get behind, but not everybody can afford to get behind it, unfortunately. And so I think that if we're producing a vision, we have to show people how this can help them with that fundamental problem. So that's why I contextualized it within cost of living, because that really is the concern. I think if we come forward with a vision and it's unclear whether this is going to cost people more or it does cost people more, that's just going to be the end of it right there. And so that's why I was asking about it in that sense, is like, have we done calculations as to what things, like what cost of living is going to look like if we don't make changes versus what cost of living could look like if we do, and help people get behind a vision for that kind of reason. This is going to help your bottom line. Because I think the thing is that if the vision doesn't include that fundamental aspect, then you're going to see people turn against it, regardless of how good it is for the environment or other outcomes. I think the bottom line is a lot of people in the territory simply can't afford to think about anything else. And that's just the nature of the reality we live in. And so I'm curious to look at it from that perspective as well.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. I will turn it to the minister.
Go down the line again. Thanks. And no, thanks for the comment. I think that's actually very helpful to ensure that when we are presenting where we land on all this, which is, as I've said, kind of a lot happening in real time and a lot to come out in the imminent future. But agreed, to be able to show people this is the world without the changes we plan to make, this is the world that we want to get to. And I mean, it's simple to say, if we continue our current state of reliance on fossil fuels, yes, GHG emissions, but that's also an extremely volatile cost driver. So to the extent that, I mean, I think a lot of us, I will venture to say, if not most or all of us, are concerned right now with costs of fuel. Even if they dip one day or another, they have been overall steadily rising and continue to be very volatile. So yeah, but to actually show that in numbers, I think that's really helpful, and I'll certainly make sure that to take that back, that we can kind of paint that exact picture of this is the world with, and this is the world we want to get to. I think that's great. Thanks.
Thank you very much. No, okay. Next on my list, I have Ms. Waylon Armstrong.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm sure you guys have attended our Cleacho Annual Assembly at some time. You know, every year when we're at the assembly, lately it's been coming up saying that, you know, we have the Dog Power Corporation. And a lot of people have been saying that if we own this, why is our electricity bills are increasing? So it seems that we're not seeing the benefit of it because of the cost, especially now that the rate is increasing. And, you know, and just like what my colleague said, a lot of people are living from paycheck to paycheck. And even when we went on the tour, constituents tour, one of the residents, especially in Gamity, said, you know, the family are living in one of the housing NWT unit. It was built by them, but they own their own house, and their monthly bill is $1,500. I don't know, something went wrong there when the house was being constructed. So, you know, and all other residents, they said they seen an increase, but not at that rate. So I did mention that to the minister before. So it would be nice if if the department can look into that, but not only that, you know, here, you know, the low growth. You guys that talked about the low growth, and I didn't hear anything about Wati and Bet'anchogh or Cleacho regions where, you know, like since the mine closing, a lot of our residents are returning home. Bet'anchogh is expanding, they're building a subdivision, and Wati is also increasing, you know. So they're gonna be needing more, I mean, we have to do more for them too, especially where it's just because of the low growth scenario looks, you know, that you guys did the 20-year plan, and community load growth from current, you know, I mean, you're gonna look at the community load growth from current sources. They're still using the diesel generator, so I'm just wondering if you guys are, you know, is there a plan in place where we're gonna be replacing that and removing that? I know that we've said it quite a few times, but we keep talking about it. And I think people would like to see that move. So I just wanted to ask about that. Thank you. That one, and then with the Bet'anchogh subdivision, and you did mention there's net zero growth scenario with the community growing. Bet'anchogh alone, there's like 2,000 people, and it's going to be more with that subdivision being created. So is there a plan in place for that as well, especially with the net zero growth? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Whalen Armstrong. I'll turn that over to Mr. Strang.
Thank you, and I appreciate the question. With respect to the load growth in Bet'anchogh, we're well aware of some of the plans in the community, and we're speaking with them. And I encourage every community, if you have subdivisions that are coming on, please reach out to us and talk to us, because then we can start planning more for new subdivisions. So definitely aware, and that's one of the items that we're seeing. So working on that one. The Wati is very interesting. When the road went in, we saw our load increase tremendously, and that caused us some operational challenges and problems with the old diesel plant that we have there. One of the things for a modernization plan on Wati is working with the Cleacho government on connecting Wati to the existing grid when the Nelly Falls and that aspect can come in. So that is part of the plan, that if that's connected to be a transmission line coming in, the power plant will be moved from the center of town. Wati is a beautiful community. If anyone's ever been there, I highly recommend it, especially in the summertime. It's beautiful water. It would be moved outside of the community, and that's traditionally a lot of their communities that we're doing. We did the same thing for Little K. We're consulting the Det'anchogh government in their community as well. It's the same aspect. So that would be the plan for the Wati and Bet'anchogh. We're well aware of that. With respect to people owning their own power, just much like the Dogwood Power Corporation that you mentioned, They would be, for anyone, this is and I appreciate the question, because when we're up in the Beaufort Delta, just communicating about what's happening with the power system plan, there's a lot of that question. Well, if I'm an independent power producer and I own a solar array or whatever, what have you, and you give me money, is that going to lower my power bill? Well, the answer to that is no, because you're just submitting your power bill. As an independent power producer, you are getting revenue stream from that component into the grid. And that is the same aspect in a lot of other areas in the country that have these types of ideas, where you have a grid and then you can just put energy into that grid. So that's a conversation with that, but that is part of the Dogger Power Corporation, the Snare Cascades hydro plant is part of the system. It's a financial arrangement that we have, a 65-year lease that goes till 2061. And we're looking forward to continued conversations with the Det'anchogh government on opportunities of hydro development on their land and how we can work together on taking advantage of some of these growth opportunities we're seeing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Emily Whalen Armstrong, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes. Okay, with that, okay, Woodgritty, same thing, they are experiencing the same problem, same issue, but they're with different outlets. So biomass is one of the things that they are, encouraging to go in that area to help with the reduce the to lower their rate. That's what that's they're working on that. We live in a rugged terrain, and it's cold 10 months of the year. So I just wanted to know, how can you encourage, this net zero growth scenario, especially for vehicles and heating? So how can you, it would be nice if we can see a plan. So I know we're talking about it, but how can you encourage and get somebody who lived here almost all their lives that, because it's not going to go a long ways, because that electricity needs something. It's got to generate from some source. So it's just that I'm not too sure how you're going to, change people's view, because we're so used to using fuel and living in this harsh environment, and especially the indigenous that are living here, because this is where we're going to be, this is where we're going to retire, this is where our families are. So how, it may be good for somewhere else, warmer climate, but in the north, it's not. So, so how are you working with other organization or indigenous organization trying to promote this net zero, especially in small communities? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Whalen Armstrong. I'll turn that over to Mr. Strang. Yes.
Thank you for the question. And the nice thing is, all four of us are in front of you. We're all Northerners, so we exactly know what you experience. And as a cold winter that we all experienced this year, which some of us, I'm trying to remember when we've had a winter this long. When it comes to, and I will talk a little bit about, and I apologize to my friends over in the Yukon for what they went through, but they went through, they had a big challenge this winter. It was minus 50 for a month straight in certain communities. And they do have a connected grid. That's one of the benefits they have that we don't. But they don't have enough generation because they have a lot of electric heat. There was a policy years ago that really promoted electric heat. So now you have new houses that are being built with only electric heat. As a Northerner and a person who likes to manage risk, I don't like having only one heat source. I have two heat sources in my own home. That's just the way I am. I like to know that if something runs out, I got another form. So when it comes, and this goes to the MLA Morse's question as well about affordability and making sure you have the reliability on the system. All those items need to be considered as people consider what they want to do on their, if they want to de-leverage themselves from using oil resources. I showed up here today in an electric car. It does work. I drove from Hay River to Yellowknife, and I charged up in Det'anchogh at the charger that we had there. That was last August. It's a challenge in the winter, I'll say that. So there are those challenges. Technology is improving. But you want to make sure that you're adapting as customers' needs adapt and change as well. You want to have that opportunity, and so that if they want to use that approach, they can use that approach. But you have to do it in a manner that ensures that reliability is there when it's -40. Because Belinda gets a call quickly, and as do I. That's the level of magnitude in this organization, is you have the two top positions that are connected all the time for every event that occurs in the north. And we have to, that's why utilities, some people get mad at us because we don't move as quick as we want. Since we are always legally obligated to make sure that we're providing service, we tiptoe in when it comes to new technologies. That's just traditionally the approach. As northerners, really tiptoe, but actively exploring it. And that's a relationship that we have a lot with strategic infrastructure. We're examining these different solutions for these items. The model that we had there for the greenhouse gas model, as I mentioned, that was the aspirational items. If everything changed, realistically, more than likely it won't. But it's going to move somewhere in that side. So you got to be prepared for it. You have to make sure your distribution, your wires are essentially big enough to solve that, to have that load, and you have that reliability. So you just have to balance that aspect of what customer needs are, and you want to be prepared for it and not just be surprised about, oh my goodness, now Watties loads up and it's Christmas, and Belinda and I are talking on Christmas Day. As much as I love talking to Belinda, having customers to turn off their stoves because we're not going to meet load is something that we don't want to do. And we had to do that. Then we fixed some items and we have more items that we want to do. So I hope I answered your question with that. Not too much of a soapbox, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strang. Next, I have MLA Morgan.
So many microphones. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you all for being here today. I am really encouraged by a lot of the direction that is being taken, and I do like to hear that, you know, we're doing more of the integrated systems planning and just planning ahead in general. What I want to talk about or ask about is asset management. And basically, I'm hoping to get more insights, just so we have a clear-eyed view into how that has been done up until now, and then what changes might be made, or maybe in the last little while have been made as we go forward. You did mention in your presentation that in 25-26, you're putting a refocus on asset management. And just to step back for a sec, I think lots of us just sort of generally see the situation as, well, a bunch of stuff was built a really long time ago, and sort of, what are we going to do now? And also we have the habit of, if something new needs to be built or replaced, then we start now thinking about how we're going to pay for that, or how we're going to do it, or, oh, I guess we better go to the feds, or we better find someone else to fund this thing. That's my impression of what we're in the habit of doing in the territory. But ideally, or in theory, we could have an asset management system where even as you're building something, even if it's 40 years ago, you think, okay, how long is this going to last? When is it going to need to be replaced? We're going to put money aside, you know, starting 40 years ago kind of thing, to replace the thing when we know. And I understand, too, that technologies change, and sometimes, you know, something comes to the end of its useful life, and maybe there's something new you should do instead of just replacing the old thing. And sometimes that's really positive, right? You talked about battery energy storage, and that is a really sort of positive and increasingly affordable and, you know, better way to go. But can you first explain how this has worked up until now? Because I'm not totally clear, and I think it would help all of us if we understood how things have worked in the past regarding how we plan for and pay for just keeping our system running when things need to be replaced or they break down, and what you hope how that's going to go moving forward, if that's not too complicated. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MLA Morgan. It's a big question, but a concise one. Mr. Strang?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to start, and then I'll turn it over to Belinda Whitford, who's as Chief Operating Officer in charge of asset management, works with our projects and engineering team. So one of the aspects you have is you have an asset base, and you have an idea how long it's going to last for, and then you start planning. Okay, this asset, if you maintain it, you have a maintenance plan, you put in your work orders, you have all your automation side on the data management side, so it's not paper. We're moving towards more of paperless, which is great in our work order system, which I really like. But then that goes into your long-term capital planning. So when we develop a 20-year capital plan, what we do, the base is your asset management plan, saying here's your asset, it's halfway through its life cycle, this is when it's going to be needing to be replaced. And then you can build that into your capital planning. Our long-term capital plan is to spend $50 million a year just in replacement. That's not talking growth. That's not talking the items we're talking about today. So Belinda's team, what her team will do is they'll have an asset management plan. I don't want to get too much into it. I'll let her talk about it. But they will build those plans and work with our capital planning team that we have to develop, okay, this is what we need to do. Obviously, you're going to have unfortunately, some things break and you just have to replace them before its life cycle ends. The plan is always I love preventative maintenance. Emergencies, you deal with them as utility people. We're good at it. We're more like firefighters sometimes, I feel. Literally firefighters the last couple of years. But I would love more and more preventative maintenance, and that's one of the items we're marching towards. So I'll turn it over to Belinda to talk a little bit more about what we're revitalizing a little bit more in the last year or two from asset management. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Strang. Ms. Whitford?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I would agree that like the traditional asset management plan or how we used to manage assets is, yes, we install this unit and it has 40-year life, so we'll think about replacing it in 40 years, that's good, and we'll just keep maintaining it until that time. I'll say over the past 15 years, things have changed significantly in a number of different areas. So I'll talk about the fact that technology has changed a lot in not only in communications and what we do, but also in how we generate electricity and how we transmit it, distribute it. And so we are finding that, the traditional model of saying this asset will last us this long is not always true now. We're finding that assets are becoming technologically obsolete more quickly. We are not able to find parts for things. They're not able to connect to new technologies as well. And so we are needing to think about that. So probably, 10 years ago, we started developing a 5-year and a 20-year capital plan. So that helps us forecast out, like, when will these assets need to be replaced? And we can look at that. And as technology starts to change, we can start to bring those replacements a little bit sooner. Also, as part of our reviews, one of the things that we're trying to do more is trying to create systems where we can monitor the condition of assets. So it's not just built on timelines, it's actually built on how are they operating in our conditions or in our environment these days. So we have, I'm going to say we've put in 5. I might be off target here. My director of hydro assets is probably cringing right now. But for 5 of our hydro plants, we have installed what we call condition monitoring sensors into the units so that we can start to monitor them like real time, what's happening with the units. That not only gives us an indication when things go wrong, but how long things are going or what their normal operating condition is. And so we can really decide when do we start to look at replacing that asset. It's not just based on a timeline anymore. It's really based on the condition of the running condition of the asset, and also what do we need to do in terms of maintenance to get the most value out of those assets. So we're really trying to focus on installing things that help give us better understanding of how the assets are working in our system, trying to get a better vision of when will things become technologically obsolete, and then also a large part of what we've been talking about too is how do we integrate new technology into it. So maybe we have a replacement for this asset on the books in 5 years, but now it's not going to be like for like. We're actually going to upgrade it, or we're going to create a system so that it will be better going forward. For a good example is our plants. Our plant standard now is that we always have to have a connection point for alternative energies these systems in all of our new plants that we install. So Norman Wells, Det'anchogh, Sax Harbor all have those opportunities built into the plants as they're installed. We are retrofitting some of our plants to allow for that as well, but it's easier to do when you're replacing the plants. So we're looking at all of those things. And then just one last point is we're also looking at, over the past year and a half, we have had a number of auxiliary systems, I guess I'll call. So we've been really focused on trying to make sure we make the most value out of our large assets and get the most value out of those, but we have not been paying as much attention to auxiliary systems as we should have. The Tulston surge tank is one of those things where we did do the monitoring we thought that was required, but we should have done a different kind of monitoring sooner to make sure that we are on top of the condition of that asset earlier. So we are looking at our auxiliary systems to make sure that some of those larger auxiliary systems are also in good condition, and we're doing the proper maintenance practices to get the most value out of those.
Thank you, Ms. Whitford. Ms. Morgan, do you have further questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for that detail. I do actually really appreciate those insights. But I want to talk now about the money, where the money comes from to plan to be replacing the things or have a different technology replace the thing. It seems that we're still kind of looking to the feds to save us. That it's like, oh, thank goodness, the D&D is here now, so we'll get them to pay for some of the things that we needed to replace and upgrade. And maybe that's not what's happening. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. But do we have any alternatives to basically going and begging to the feds every time we need upgrades and repairs? Is there a way? Have we set money aside? Have we been, squirreling away money to pay for these things? Is it just projects over a certain amount, just like the much larger projects that we can't squirrel away enough money for? Maybe you can give us some insights into both the challenges and the strategies that we have to find the money. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Mr. Strang.
Thank you for the question. One of the interesting components is how utilities are regulated by the NWT Public Utility Board. Well, there's the Public Utilities Act, and the way that the regulation is set in the Northwest Territories, there are no future savings accounts for future assets. That's not the way that it's a cost-based analysis where you look at your costs over your next 2 years, what you have for your assets, what you need to provide service to customers, and that's how rates are determined. There's not a mechanism to put away a savings account for like a municipal bound, like where you have reserves and things like that. That's not the way it's done. It's really the cost today. Customers today should be paying for the service they have today. You don't want to make customers 10 years from now paying for service today or vice versa. That's the way the regulation is done. So that's the act. So on that side, it really is. We're about $150 million a year, which it costs us to provide the service that we provide, and people are upset about that. And no one up on this table here is denying that, but that's the cost that it costs us every year to provide service, electricity service that we have, and that's based on the fuel price that we have. That's based on the salaries, expenses, and the assets and the amortization that we have of our assets. I mentioned earlier our capital replacement program is about $50 million a year. We amortize about $25 million a year, so we expense $25 million. That's in rates. That difference of $50 million cash out the door, but you're recovering $25 million from your customers to pay for that $25 million, it's got to come from somewhere. So that we're using short-term debt to finance that capital investment until we get into rates. We're a cost recovery business. We're not a profit business. So you're saying you're always looking for the feds to help finance these items. The traditional model is always customer funded. But if you can use federal programs, such as the old ISIP program, a lot of folks in the room have heard that one. The new one is SysRIP. It's another program. If you can use that to your advantage, and that's why we work so closely with strategic infrastructure and all these programs, then we can put our projects in play to say, okay, this is what our stacking order is. Here's our 20-year plan, these items. If you can have that funded by the federal government, so the people in the Northwest Territories, there's only 44,000 of us. If you don't get that funding, then the 44,000 people need to pay for it. That's just the way the model's designed right now. You don't put a savings account away for these items. Do you want to, Minister, do you have anything to add with that on a policy perspective? Sorry, I don't know if I answered your question. I wanted to get into a little bit about how utilities recover their costs and the timing of it. It really is almost a just in time. It's not a large receivable going away, because then you get into this concept of, it's called intergenerational inequity, where you have customers today paying for customers 10 years from now. And from a regulatory economic standpoint, they really try not to do that. And that's traditional economic regulation going back to the 60s. So you don't have that model. So that's what we try to do. We know our capital plan. We know how much customers will have to pay for it. But if there's any funding mechanisms that we can do, or even work with our Indigenous governments who have a lot of access to funding that we might not have access to, that's how this independent power producer program, from a policy perspective, that is what's really attractive about it. And that's why we go back to what happened in 1993 with the Dogger Power Corporation, creating the first hydro plant. That's why those conversations are happening, and that's why they need to happen. Because if not, customers need to bear those costs. But there's other opportunities that we can do to have some income for Indigenous governments and communities, and can make sure that it's not 100% borne by ratepayers right now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Strang. Minister Wozniak, did you wish to add to that answer?
Sure. I will try to be brief. I mean, I don't have a lot to add. I guess I would echo the notion of intergenerational inequity arguably applies equally to the debt load that is taken on by the government of the Northwest Territories or any other government. If we're going to invest in an operational asset of today, so if we're going to subsidize our rates today, then, and if we don't have that built into our fiscal strategy and we wind up taking on debt to do that, then we are taking on debt to deal with the cost of today on the backs of the future taxpayers of tomorrow. And while it is not enviable to constantly be handout to the federal government, at the same time, we are all taxpayers to the federal government. So we are taxpayers in a rate base of 44,000, which is a very small tax base to be able to spend money on hospitals, schools, and power systems. But we are also all taxpayers to the much larger economy of scale, which is the federal government, which I don't know the current size of the Canadian population off the top of my head, but it's a lot bigger than 44,000 people. So going to the federal government to say we need to support this massive geographic region of this country in a way that arguably was not done in the course of Canadian history, in the same way that some of the grid connections were established and built, I don't know that that's something that we should be necessarily ashamed of, particularly when we're doing it at a time where there's a lot of attention on the Arctic security, geopolitical positioning, and the fact that there's a lot of assets here that are perhaps going to be reaching their end of life elsewhere, so the critical minerals, for instance. But so yeah, I don't have a lot of concern going to the federal government to say, we need a larger share than what you might give to a different jurisdiction. Although even then, some of the size and scale of the investments that the federal government makes on projects down south are significant. So, us getting something with a B beside it in a single digit, well, there's provinces they're getting B's beside them in double digits. So I don't necessarily have the concern of going to the federal government. I do want to be strategic about what we go and ask for. And that comes back to the earlier conversation and questions about having a vision, having a plan, and doing it in a way that makes sense for the whole territory and for our future planning. So yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister Wozniak. Just for your edification, the population of Canada as of January 1 is 41 million. I next have Mr. Testart for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, I've come to appreciate in our numerous conversations over the course of the term how challenging this power situation is in terms of clear policy solutions that would reduce the cost of power. But I can tell you this is the number one affordability issue I hear about all the time, and people are very frustrated. And basically, the response saying our hands are tied is really not good enough for, I think, the vast majority of ratepayers. in the Northwest Territories, whether it's, you know, a very isolated diesel community, or Yellowknife, or even the South Slaves that are closer to the hydro sources. So that being said, if we can't easily reduce the rates because, you know, they're always going to go up that 2%, or, you know, required to cost recover infrastructure that's not funded by external sources, then it would seem the only savings we could pass on is by reducing operational costs at NTPC directly, which would increase either profit margins or just reduce overhead generally. So what incentives are in place, either directed by the board or by the, well, I guess it would be directed by the board now, or previously directed by the board as it was under deputy ministers, but what incentives, performance incentives for NTPC are in place to encourage cost savings and efficiencies? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. Ms. Goucher, would you like to take this one, or Mr. Strang?
Okay.
Thank you for the question. I'll introduce Chair Goucher here in a quick second. I'll talk about, there was a mandate letter that was issued by Minister Wozniak to the new chair, and one of those items was looking at efficiencies in those items. So I'll turn it over to Judy Goucher, Chair of NTPC and NT Hydro, to touch on a little bit of the aspects from the short tenure of the new independent board, and what are some of the items that they're looking from management. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Goucher, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think.
Sorry, just 1 second, your microphone's on.
It's not red.
Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you. The board, as I think Corey mentioned earlier on, the board is getting together in September, and we're going through the existing strategic plan of NTPC, NT Hydro. That's really our first opportunity as a hybrid board to get together and start digging into some of these issues. Previous boards have put things in place like incentives to reduce costs, but for us as a new board, we're looking at how effective have those been, what needs to change going forward. As Corey mentioned, we now have a letter of direction from the minister, so we want to make sure that we have alignment in there, and affordability and cost reduction, and looking at the organization is part of that piece. So September is really a chance for us to roll up our sleeves and dig deeper into those issues. But I can tell you, we've had one full meeting of the hybrid board, and definitely with representation across the territories. Affordability is a very clear message that's being discussed at the board level as well. And I would also put in a pitch that the integrated power system planning may also open doors to affordability. For sure, if the discussion is about battery energy storage, reliability is part of that dialogue. So maybe some of the emphasis needs to be going forward on communication. I know that's not ideal for people who are looking for how can we reduce costs, but it's a starting point. And having an educated consumer is a valuable consumer. It helps them do what they need to do. As MLA Armstrong indicated, she has a constituent who's got a high power bill, and they need help understanding what's driving it. So maybe that's part of the piece. I don't want to presuppose on what our strategy session will bring, but I will say definitely the conversation is happening around affordability, and my expectation is that we'll see something coming out of the updated strategic plan and communicated out, not just on that topic, but on other topics, because we're talking about that as well.
Thank you, Ms. Goucher. Mr. Testart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I encourage you to look at some carrots and some sticks, because ultimately this business runs itself, and when there are, significant cost to taxpayers, the subsidy will inevitably be rolled out. So that's kind of, there's a safety net built in, and we need to have management understanding that Northerners are, quite frankly, pissed off, and we need to see more progress on this. And I caution you against trying to educate the public. The public is very educated on how much they're paying. And we hear this from government all the time, that this is a problem of comprehension of people who are, of the public who are upset. And I don't think that's the issue here. They want to see a plan, they want to see vision, and they want to know when these cost savings are going, or stabilization efforts are going to actually affect it. So to that end, the other major technological revolution that's happening right now in the world is AI-driven solutions. I have seen a few of these that include battery backup solutions, managing efficiency of power flow and generation. What AI tools are you investigating, and what is the AI policy for NTPC? Because it's important that we become early adopters for this stuff, or else it's going to take years and years and years for us to catch up. And if we lower the operational costs to generate power, we can take some pressure off the system. And if we can bring a tech solution that can do that, even if there's some initial infrastructure costs to get it started, but it's going to level out over time, that would be hugely beneficial. And I think all governments are tiptoeing around this because there's a lot of issues related to it. You have a bit more flexibility as a crown corp or territorial corp. So what AI solutions are you investigating, and when can we expect to see technological integration that will increase efficiency and lower operational costs? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Testart. Mr. Strang.
Thank you. NTPC does have a artificial intelligence policy. It was just something we introduced, I believe, last year, and my Director of Information Technology is probably cringing. Could have been the year prior to that. The one thing I would caution all folks on is you still need people. We speak closely with our union, who wants to know about our artificial intelligence policy that we have. Artificial intelligence is only good as the inputs that you put in. You put something into ChatGPT, it's going to spit you something out that if you just follow without questioning it, you might end up a different road that you don't want to go on. When it comes to technology, and we use, for a good example, we have all of the acronym's called SCADA, System Control and Data Acquisition. It's basically how our machines talk. We already use a lot of these items and how they automatically change items. For example, in smaller power plants, if an engine shuts down, one automatically starts up. You can use software programs that are artificially driven to optimize those items to get as much performance as your power plant you possibly can. In saying that, though, you're only as good as the engines that you have. Each engine only has a manufacturer rating of how efficient it is. That's the maximum you're going to get. But if you introduce more renewable sources, again, what we talked about earlier about battery energy storage technology, then you can maximize your solar interruptible penetration items and reduce some of your product inputs that you have. We have just over 200 employees. We don't have a high full-time equivalent count of employees. We have a lot of demands on our systems right now just to keep the lights on and also explore the items that we're talking about today. So we're regulated by the Public Utility Board that reviews our books every time we file a GRA. That is their job, is to make sure that we're doing things efficiently and as effective as we possibly can. So artificial intelligence, definitely a tool in the toolbox we're examining. We want to use it cautiously, as I mentioned earlier, but we're definitely examining it, and we want to try to see if we can use things such as simple things as Microsoft Copilot to help out in some items that we're doing. That also costs money. Every license is $40 per person. So these are the items that we're looking at, and we're definitely looking at artificial intelligence and how we can use it as a tool in our toolbox for efficiency to get more if we don't have more output to spread those costs over, how can we get a little more efficient so the input is a little more stable and not going up by that 2 or 3% a year. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Strang. As committee has gone through one full round of questions so far, I hope they'll give me the indulgence to ask a question of my own. Early in your presentation, you spoke to the complexity of all of the different pieces in the North Slave grid. Could you expand a little bit more on that, specifically the distribution port? You spoke to how NACA distribution adds more complexity. So I guess I heard through the presentation that you're looking to see where things connect and where things make the most sense to sort of smooth things out, even them out. But I'd love to hear more about that particular piece, and I assume that would be Ms. Whitford. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so definitely coordination with our distributor and Yellowknife is critical to ensuring reliability of power. So we do meet and we do coordinate on a regular basis, and I'll say on a working level, probably if not daily, close to daily, on various things with NACA on the Yellowknife system. Two of the things that are that we're really trying to focus on is is load management, I guess. So we do, one of the things that we talk about when we do meet with NACA is to make sure that we understand like how are they forecasting load changes, because that's not only important for their distribution system, but that's also important to make sure that we have the power being generated to support them. So we do have that discussion quite often, and like I said, we have restarted our in-person quarterly meetings just to really make sure that we, if we haven't addressed it in the 3 months between those meetings, if we haven't addressed it, that we do sit down and talk about specifically load issues, changes that we're both making to the system so that we understand, do we need to change our protection system or the coordination between our protection systems? Do we need to change how our systems connect? Do we have people working on the same sites together? Things like that. So we do meet to have that discussion quarterly. To make sure that we're working well together. And then also back in April of 2025, we also had on April 5th, we had a little bit of, social media conflict. And so we've really been working together to make sure that our communication is coordinated, and so that we both utilities we understand where the root cause is, and that we're communicating good messages to customers so that they understand what the impact is going to be to them. Where is the problem? How long is it taking to get addressed? How are the two utilities working together? So we're trying to communicate that information out and make sure that customers understand that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'll keep my question to just that one. I do have one member with a question. I will also just note that we are coming up to our 11 o'clock close. So if there are questions online, please put your hand up at this time. Mr. Hawkins, one question, please.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to make it efficient. So a little bit of a preamble to the question, but I'm hopeful that it'll get to where it's going. So as many MLAs have already pointed out, I mean, the cost of living is challenging. Nobody at this table is, this is no foreign language to anybody at the table, so I won't lean into that. But the two topics they always talk about is the cost of fuel and guess what? The cost of power. And I know we're here to talk about reliability, but unfortunately, reliability is closely joined at the hip to affordability. And I think it's one of the challenges here in this overall discussion is that like how it's approached. And the example I'll give you is that, you know, when I look at my personal power bill, no different than when I speak to constituents, I'm like, you know, the overall power bill is extraordinary, but when I look at the actual cost of the power itself, you know, it's quite a smaller fraction. It's the rate riders that constantly keep growing and growing and dumped on the consumer, be it me, my neighbors, my friends, my city, my towns, my small communities, et cetera. You know, people point out that the rate riders are so aggressive, you know, they feel like they've been rate ridered out of town, you know, given the fact of the cost. And I'm not trying to be tongue in cheek on that, but that's how people feel. So I'm really, where I'm driving my question to, Madam Chair, is about the affordability and options. So if the current financial modeling and structure of all repairs are built on, you know, point in time, you pay now, I get it. I mean, we have to come up with a formula and approach, and I recognize this is the approach there. So I'm not stripping away as just because we do this is because we do this, but there must be other ways of approaching the financial challenge, because ultimately, I know you say we have to fix, build, repair, and meet the needs of the customer. That takes away the financial challenge in question. But the problem is, at the end of the day, when the medium income, is not there enough to be able to deal with power, because we don't have option B other than plugging in and tapping into our power. The affordability is back to the reliability problem, which is you're solving a reliability problem. MLAs are always worried about affordability. So in short, Madam Chair, I guess it's, you cannot disconnect them. So is there other models that you could consider or approach or propose that are outside of the standard legislated approach? I mean, would it be conceivable that some of these capital costs become sort of territorial costs as opposed to dumped on the individual payer? Because when someone tells me they pay $1,000 for power bill, and that's not everybody, but family income is a little over gross, it is a little over 100,000, it doesn't leave a lot on the table, and they have nowhere else to go. And I know you know this, but I mean, there must be a better way to deal with things like the riders. And if it requires legislative change or imagination or other considerations, I'd love to hear what option B, C, and D are, and tell us to help you find a way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. 6 minutes to solve the problem, Mr. Strang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And unfortunately, I can't speak to the MLA's power bill because that's not one of my power bills. We don't have nearly as many riders as what you'd experience in the city of Yellowknife. It goes to more of the legislative side. We talked about the NWT Public Utility Board earlier today, and a traditional approach for utilities is that cost recovery model that we talked about earlier. Regulators, when they set the base price of power, they want the price of power to not fluctuate all that much so people can make informed decisions about what they need. And a rider is really a temporary measure for those cost increases or decreases, because there has been refund riders, not as much as collection riders in the history. But it's just a regulatory approach that is used by regulators across the country to reduce riders and to reduce the base costs. We talked about this earlier, about the importance of funding, especially for capital projects, through either the territorial government or the federal government through programs that they have. That would be, if you have to replace a power plant or replace an engine, if that can be funded, not by customer money, but by a third-party source, that is 100% benefit to customers. And that's one of the items we do. To change the fact, you would have to change the Public Utilities Act on those items to not have those riders, but the riders are really a mechanism, I talked about the intergenerational equity component before. That is a regulatory concept that is very proven across jurisdictions in Canada, not just here in the Northwest Territories. So I don't have an answer for the MLA right now. I hear it all the time too. Our bills are the ugliest they've ever looked. I'm going to be very frank with that. We have a lot of riders on right now, the most we've had in our history. My director of customer service reminds me of that because she has to prepare the bills, which is very complex, the system behind that builds it. So it is a challenge. I know this isn't the answer that you want to hear, but we're not the only jurisdiction in Canada that deals with these types of components with riders that come on to get these balances done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Strang. Mr. Strang and Minister Wozniak, thank you for all of your time today. We are coming up against our close, so seeing no further questions online or in the room, I would just say if you have any closing remarks or final thoughts to share with committee before you leave. No, not today. Well, thank you, Minister Wozniak, Mr. Strang, Ms. Whitford, Ms. Goucher. And this concludes the public portion of our meeting. Colleagues, per usual, just ask that you wait around as we have other business to conduct after the public portion. Thank you.